evening to all. On behalf of the Intandem Research Club, I welcome you all to the fortnightly symposium of Research Department of English, Queen Mary's College. I am Sayed Ibrahima from 2nd MA English Literature, and I'll be your compere for today's session. For the academic year 2024 to 2025, we have chosen the theme Conflict, Peace, Reconciliation, and Planetary Well-being. Today's topic is Prison Narratives and Surveillance. We are honored to have a distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Ajay Ramakrishnan Venkitachalam, sir, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Asan Memorial College of Arts and Science, Chennai. Welcome, sir. I also extend a warm welcome to our esteemed paper presenters, Ms. Iranggumle Hemang and Dr. Somrwita Ghosh. I extend heartfelt welcome to all faculty members, research scholars, and students who have joined us today. Today's symposium will proceed with a keynote address followed by our paper presenters. I now deem it an honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Ajay Ramakrishnan Venkitachalam, sir. Sir is an assistant professor in the Department of English at Asan Memorial College of Arts and Science, Chennai. His research areas include carceral studies, post-colonial literature, and surveillance. Today, he will be speaking on the topic Surveilling the Panopticon, an analysis of Arun Ferreira's Colors of the Cage, a prison memoir. We are greatly privileged to have you with us today, sir. Now, I request Dr. Ajay Ramakrishnan Venkitachalam, sir, to take over. The forum is yours, sir.
Thank you. I would like to thank everybody for that wonderful introduction, and I'll also like to thank the Department of English at Queen Mary's College and in tandem for giving me this opportunity to speak here today. So, proceeding further, let's just look at the overall topic within which we are speaking today. We're talking about prison, prison writing, and we're also talking about surveillance. So, my keynote specifically would revolve around the concept of surveillance or surveillance as it was introduced within the prison space. So, why do I use the word introduced? This is significant because we can actually pinpoint a specific point or time in history when surveillance came to the forefront of prison design, reformation, architecture, and how a prison apparatus is supposed to be applied in order to control and understand its occupants, who are the inmates. So, the chief proponent of those ideas was English philosopher, utilitarian thinker, and jurist Jeremy Bentham. So in 1791, he comes out with this idea of the Panopticon. So Panopticon is a Greek word that actually roughly translates to all seeing. And he uses that word to describe an architectural apparatus that he envisioned would become the perfect building or structure that is capable of housing multiple inmates who can be surveilled all the time without any way of them knowing they're being watched. So, this structure, Bentham believed, would be the next step in making the prison a place wherein the inmates can be observed, controlled, and slowly reformed. And he went about suggesting this idea in England. And slowly, a lot of people followed through, and these ideas that he propounded with respect to the Panopticon slowly began to be applied and systematically take over a lot of prison structures, not only in England, but through the colonial apparatus in India also. But one thing led to another, and his apparatus couldn't be applied in a perfect sense, especially in a country like India. This stems from the fact that the Indian prison system contrary to what the British were talking about in their own country, the Indian prison system run under the British Raj was actually used to house any form of dissident voices, any form of difference that they felt among the population, and also as a means of housing a labor force that they could use systematically for their own needs. Therefore, the intention of the Indian prison, as envisioned by the British, was not always based on reformation. Rather, they wanted to control the inmates in a certain way, but also to use them for their own needs. And this could be observed at different instances throughout history. So, what happened was you get a system in India that could perfectly adapt Bentham's Panopticon, but that could also be said of those models that were applied even in the West, especially in England. But in India, the prison was envisioned more or less like a housing unit that also served as a factory or a place that supplied labor. And what happened was here, one of the first things that the British did that went against the ideas put forward by thinkers like Bentham was that they implemented the convict warder system, wherein they actually took convicts, life convicts, and gave them the power to surveil, control, and also coerce the inmates within prison. And those convict warders would be observed by the prison staff, who are then observed by people in higher positions of authority. So what happened in the Indian prison was, rather than a space of surveillance, what was established was a space of multivalence. So when I use the word multivalence, what it means is every person looking over the shoulder of everybody else, and every person looking into what every other person was doing. So therefore, there was a structure where every man kept the other in a state of surveillance. And within this multi-layered network that operated within prison, the authority could try to mediate, not enforce, but mediate some level of control. When I say mediate control, I am talking with respect to the day-to-day happenings inside prison. So this system is what has been prevalent in India, and throughout history, the, this system hasn't gone too much of an alteration. Even if you go to a prison that in the modern times, suppose let's say Tihar or Pudal, if you observe the day-to-day activities inside these prisons, or the different reports that we usually get in media or through prison narratives, one can observe that the same system continues to exist in one form or the other within that prison, wherein inmates keep other inmates under certain levels of surveillance, and convict warders are involved, then prison staff are involved, then higher forms of authority come in and they try to keep people within some level of surveillance. But what happens is each inmate also has positions from where he or she can also surveil those in places of authority. This is clear when we look at prison narratives. So at this point, let me just come into the text that we are looking at today. Arun Ferreira's Colors of the Cage, a prison memoir. So this was published back in 2014. So why this specific text, and how is it related to surveillance? Well, if you look at prison writings, when a working definition of prison writing, or the way I intend to use it in this keynote, is writings by prisoners about their prison experiences that takes on multiple genres, the forms of multiple genres like life writing, poetry, fiction, socio-political commentary, etc. So, Colors of the Cage by Arun Ferreira is actually classified as a memoir, which is very good because among the different genres of life writing, there are scholars who would actually say, like Gaston Bachelard, who would actually say, memoir is the one that is least burdened among the genres of life writing with the weight of tradition. Therefore, memoir writing has actually managed to evolve with the times and include within its form and structure different elements that are able to convey different types of emotions as they are experienced. So how are these different elements combined? If you look at Arun Ferreira's Colors of the Cage, it operates at two levels. You have letters and you also have his writing. So both of these things are different. The letters are actually given in italics. Each chapter has a letter in its beginning, or you can also find letters in the middle of chapters. And in between the letters, you have his writing. So what's happening is those letters were written by Ferreira when he was incarcerated. He had written those letters to his wife, and after his incarceration, that is after coming out of prison, he takes all the letters, goes through them again. That helps him jog his memory, and as he goes through each letter, whatever he remembers, he puts it down in writing, and that writing is actually given in a normal font, whereas the letters are given in italics. Each chapter also has drawings that he made during his time in prison. So this is unique because you have two layers of writing within the same text. One might ask the question, so what's the difference? So the difference is the letter and the drawing are pieces of prison literature that were written by Arun Ferreira during his period of incarceration. That is, when he was under surveillance and all forms of oppressive systems within the Nagpur prison. And that which he recollects and writes, he had written after his release. That is, after he had come out of that ordeal, settled down, calmed himself, took his time, and then he starts writing about it. This is significant because certain prison scholars, there are prison scholars like Lachlan Wachlin from Ireland, who talk about this key difference in prison writing. So Wachlin actually classifies this using two Celtic words, Celtic phrases rather, Theob amigui and Faoi glass. So Theob, the concept is quite simple. Theob amigui is a writing by a prisoner during the period of his incarceration, his or her incarceration, and Foul Glass talks about the writing by a prisoner after the period of his incarceration. The difference is, at one instance, he experiences the complete force and power of the prison as he dwells within it. In the other instance, he's actually removed himself. The experience has passed, the experience is in the past, and he has to recollect his memory and try to come out with his writing. This is significant because sometimes in the latter, that is, when the prisoner writes about his experience after his period of incarceration, there is the chance of those writings becoming more political in their nature or more political in the dimension of the ideas that they put forward. But when they write from within, not that when they write during the period of the incarceration, there is no political element. Rather, the methods that they use have to be a little more covert because they are still under surveillance. Each of their writing is being read. I'll give you one more instance from Ferreira's book. So after a couple of letters, his wife suggests to Ferreira to start numbering the letters that he sends her. So from page 50 in the book, you can actually see that he starts numbering his letters. The book actually contains a total of 44 letters that Ferreira sent to his wife. But from page 50, he starts numbering them. So the letter you see at page 50 is numbered 1. But before that, you actually have nearly 4 letters that he had sent his wife. After he starts numbering, you would notice that the letter that follows, or the letter that follows after the one that is numbered 1, is 3, and the one that follows that is 7. So what's happening in between is his letters are being stopped by the prison authority. They're going through what he's writing, they're stopping the letters from reaching his wife, and they're slowly eliminating certain content that he wants to write down. So he is able to physically show through his writing the level of surveillance that he experiences. Why this level of surveillance? That is because Arun Ferreira was actually imprisoned for 4 years and 8 months in the Nagpur prison on charges of being a Maoist sympathizer, a Naxalite sympathizer. Naturally, he was put under the most strenuous of systems that completely eliminated him from the general population of prison, and also made him come under the observation and the surveillance of the authority at multiple levels. And throughout his narrative, you can see the different dimensions of problems he faces. But what is significant here is, through that surveillance, even in the letters, what happens is he is able to slowly shift the way the Panopticon is surveilling him, and he starts surveilling the Panopticon. Okay, how does he do it? The first thing that he does is he starts by self surveilling. So, what is self surveilling? He starts observing himself. So, he's not been in prison before. So, what's happening to his physical body? What's happening to his mental state? What assistance does he need from the outside, from his wife, from his family? So, in the initial letters and also in the writing, you can see that he is observing the changes that his body and mind experiences within prison. Sometimes it might be a very common sentence like, you sent me a bunch of dresses and I am unable to wear any of them because I have shrunk in size. The food inside here doesn't suit me. This is how the prisoner slowly starts counter surveilling. He starts observing himself at a physical level and also at a mental level, because Arun Ferreira, requests his wife to start sending him books within prison, since he feels his mind needs to be engaged. And after receiving the books, there is a clear discussion that he follows through with his wife through his letters, wherein he talks about the different ideas that he gets from the books and how those ideas not only influence him but also the way he starts looking at the prison. So, what happens is he starts off by a method of self surveillance, and slowly the surveillance that he poses on himself slowly starts shifting towards the space that he occupies, which is the prison. And step by step, he is able to see how the prison and also the larger structures that control the prison and also the judicial apparatus seem to operate. In the latter half of not only the book but even the letters, the 44 letters, one can see that the focus has now shifted not only from him, but rather his focus now rests on how the prison does certain things, how it treats certain prisoners, how it treats foreign nationals, how those foreign nationals see the way Indian prisons operate. And what happens is he is able to systematically start surveilling the prison through this method. and he is able to get more data from the system of multivalence that I was talking about earlier. Since also able to slowly start interacting with other prisoners and find his position within the prison hierarchy, thereby enabling him to get data and information from the other prisoners. When I say other prisoners, I'm talking about other Naxal prisoners or other high security prisoners, about how they see the prison, how they see the world around them, how they see society, and how they see the judicial apparatus as it operates in in cahoots rather with the prison system. And slowly we can see a narrative start building up wherein he presents us with an image of the prison as it operates in its day-to-day life. And the image that we get is not one of a domineering power structure that seems to subjugate or oppress the prisoners that it holds inside. Rather, what the image that we get is of a system where power is actually mediated, it is negotiated among individuals based on a certain hierarchy, and only in certain instances, those certain instances are exceptional instances like riots, prison deaths, etc., wherein the force of the state is allowed to come in. But in the day to day activities of the prison, what he sees is that there is a level of anxiety that the authority experiences when engaging with any inmate. One example that he provides is in the housing of transgender inmates. When a transgender needs to be housed within a prison complex, the authority faces certain issues. Where do we house them? Do we house them in the men's prison, or do we house them in the women's prison, or do we house them in a separate block? How do we prevent other prisoners trying to get to them or trying to harass them? Ferreira himself observes how this specific conundrum is faced by the authority within prison, and the entire prison fumbles certain things and reveals its level of anxiety when they are unable to clearly house those prisoners in a safe space within the prison. So what this means is, from self-surveillance, Ferreira is able to extend that and connect with the larger system of multivalence within the prison. And through that, he is able to put forward a position or a perspective of dissidence, which can be inferred when one considers theories put forward by people like Pramod K. Nair, wherein they talk about dissident surveillance. the the person or the inmate who is in a position of subalternity is able to shift the gaze onto the one that is surveilling him or her and come out with a perspective that seems to problematize their authority, their position, their power. And this method is explained as dissident surveillance. So systematically, he is able to come out with a position of dissident surveillance, not only of the prison, but even of the larger society, the nation, and even world politics. So why this method? So what's the use of all these methods? In order to understand that, one needs to consider a principal idea put forward by Michel Foucault in his work Discipline and Punish. One of the earliest ideas that Foucault puts forward is with respect to the case of Damiens the regicide. So Damiens had killed his king and he was to be executed publicly. And Foucault goes on to describe that the public execution of Damiens was completely botched up. It could not done perfectly, and what that created was a visual situation wherein the authority was made to be seen as a tyrant. The people saw the authority as a tyrant. Naturally, Foucault goes on to explain that since this was a problem, the authority could not be seen as being unable to execute its processes efficiently. Therefore, they shifted the space of punishment within the prison itself. Naturally, all forms of punishment meted out within prison is actually taken place or orchestrated within the prison itself. Even hangings take place within prison, and the entire prison is veiled off from the public eye, from the surveillance of the public by its position. Foucault describes this. Now, coming back to Ferreira, through his attempt at dissident surveillance, he is able to shift the panoptic gaze of the prison, turn it on its head, and put it on display through his writing for others to see. This aspect is defined as the performance of through his writing, through his other forms of literary and artistic expression, he is able to open up the prison space that is veiled off from the eyes of society and open it up to be observed from outside eyes. How does he do it? By increasing the surveillance on himself through his act of writing and through his act of publishing his work, coming out and sharing his experiences. He makes others who are not inside prison, who have not gone into prison, who are part of the larger mainstream society, to look at him, and through the process of looking at him, he gives them the power to look into the prison. He gives them the ability to surveil the prison. So when one picks up prison writing, any form of prison writing, the writer actually gives you, the reader, a window to look into the panopticon, to surveil the panopticon, to see it as it exists, to see the way it operates, and to come to terms with how it is supposed to work and how it actually works. This is significant because he, and when I say he, I'm talking about the writer, changes his position intentionally because he is usually presented or conceived by the authority as a victim or a witness, a criminal or a perpetrator. Rather, through his writing, the author is able to shift this subject position from a victim witness, from a victim who can only witness, to an active witness who has rights, who has certain realities that are denied to him within prison, who is able to depict and display the discrepancies within the prison system, and who is able to also show and comment on how the prism system is supposed to operate based on the rules. And what naturally eliminates the panoptic gaze or any form of surveillance that seems to seize control, multivalence, or any form of surveillance that seems to dwell or operate within the prison, because the prison now stands exposed and it can be surveilled by people from the outside. So this is one dimension of how prison writing is able to flip the surveillance mechanism that operates within prison, turn it on its head, and use it to counter its own methods against it by artistic expression. So I would like to conclude today's keynote with this point, and I hope there are questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your wisdom. Ma'am,
Yes, please invite the next speaker. I think Iranggumle has to go next.
our first paper presenter is Miss Iranggumle Hemang, a PhD research scholar in the Department of English at Queen Mary's College, Chennai. Her research focuses on the trauma of war victims from the hills of Nagaland. Now, I request Miss Hemang to present her paper.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Uh, okay. Hi. A very good evening to one and all. My name is Iranggumle Hemang, a PhD scholar from Queen Mary's College. Today, I will be presenting on the topic of trauma of war victims from the hills of Nagaland. Uh, Based on the experience of war victims who were in prison as well, faced the atrocity of Indian governments. Um, I will not be talking about on the particular persons or a book, but an original collection, which was the first-hand information related to the Naga Wars and Indian Army. So today I will be focusing more on the activities, surveillance of Indian Army towards the Naga freedom fighter, which led to the destructions of the entire Naga village and also the people, and how people were in prisons and tortured to dig out the informations of the Naga freedom fighters. I will also be focusing more on the traumas of the war victims, which led to the surveillance by the Indian army. So to start off, let me share my screen. Give me a moment. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this will be my topic, traumas of the war victims from the hills of Nagaland. To start off with, I would like to give a brief introduction about the Naga peoples, their nature, and their occupations, and Naga as a warrior. The Nagas are a population of Mongolic descent from presently reside towards the northeast frontiers of Indian subcontinent. This group of related tribes occupy a contiguous region spread across the present days of Indian state, which is called the northeastern state of Nagaland, Assam, Manipur, Arunachal, and also across the international borders in Myanmar. Though the Naga people had trade and military relationship with neighboring kingdoms in the olden days, such like the Ahoms, Manipur, and Burma, they remained in relative isolations and anonymity till the early 19th century. During the early 19th century, the British colonizations of India led to the deep incursions and explorations of Naga territory in the early 19th and early 20th century. Upon this discovered by the British, the Naga tribe became a widely popular for their practice of head hunting, according to many research scholars, and this is how many people known the Naga culture as the headhunters. So I will talk about the natures of the peoples and their occupations and this practice of agriculture agriculture traditions and customary law, meat and folklores, food, clothes, value, lifestyle, etc. In other aspects, which define their social identity. The differences in language, tradition, attire, history, festive food, Nagas are comprised of many tribes such as Sumi, Ao, Angamis, Chakesang, Lotas, Kenyungam, Zili tribe. Each tribe have their own history and cultural identity. The differences in language, tradition, attires, history, festive food, folklores, and festival, among other things, marks out the differences between the Naga tribe. Even though every tribe has their own language with greater interactions and exchange among the people, in the present days, English and Nagamese has been adopted as a common and an official language for Naga society. So, talking about Naga as a warrior, in the olden days, young Naga boys spend their time together in the Morong. Morong is a place where young boys are gathered to train, to educate, or to taught the craft, the craftsmanship, and also life skill, as well as war tactic. They were also they were also told the stories about your ancestor, about your tribe, about your customs, and by the elders. They were separated. There were separate morongs for boys and girls, and women's are not allowed in the boys' dormitory or morongs as well. The men's are not allowed in girls' dormitory or girls' morong. In this way, Morong also served as an educational institute for both boys and girls. In every village practiced headhunting to protect the village from their enemies. During those olden days, the only way to acknowledge a person as the strongest warrior in the village or in the region or in their own areas, they have to be the fiercest warrior, and also a person must collect as many he can to be recognized by the people as the strongest warrior. For example, like in these present days, when the award for a bravery to an Indian army was given like those of the Rama Veer Chakra, that is kind of similar to those olden days when a person is a good headhunter, he is awarded as a winner or as the strongest warrior from the region or from the area. That is how it is compared when we talk about headhunting, because lots of people has a curiosity of why we Nagas do the headhuntings. It is not just because of savage or something like that, but it is like a trophy or a prize during those days to acknowledge the strongest warrior or something like that. So this is about the introductions of Inagas. Let me go to my, so here, um, war between the Indian armies and Nagas. Okay, when I talk about the war between Indian army and Nagas, um, I'm talking about the struggles of the Naga village under the surveillance of Indian army. The war which was brought between Indian armies and Naga freedom fighter in the year 1955 to 1964 is one of the fiercest battles that the people of Naga came across after the war with the Japanese people. The NNC, which is called Naga Nationalist Council, was formed in 2nd February 1946 in Waka, Nagaland. And with this newly formed organization, the Naga seek and plead for independence from the British government as well as from the Indian government. And finally, on the 14th of August After the British left India, the leader of INC, Mahatma Gandhi, declared the independence of Naga people a day before the Indian independence in the year 1947. However, after the independence of India, the Indian government was not willing to let go of the Naga people from its constitutions. Therefore, the rivals began, and the Indian army, with their surveillance, started to hunt down the freedom fighter one after the other, leading the extreme works to the harassment of the entire village as well as the Naga freedom fighter. This is not just an the Naga freedom fighter were not just a normal they were not just an army or something like that, but they were all farmers, normal farmers. They were normal people like any of the other civilians who is fighting for their own village and for their own people, because we do not have an army something like that in the olden days, but we have the village chief and so on. The youth of the village will defend whatever comes in the village, or if the enemy comes or any other like an army, whatever it comes, we always consider the youth which is like a young men of the village. They have to fight for, or they have to defend the village, or they have to defend the children and the women. So the invasions of the village from village to village were burned from one village to another, which led to the struggle of the entire village, and the women and children were the victim of Indian army, as the men had to go and defend the village during those war. The traumas of the victims. When it comes to the traumas of the victims in the chaos of the wars, and the women and the children were the most victimized during the war, as the children lost their parents and women to look after what is left of the country and ensure that the country remains
Iranggumle, could you ensure better connectivity because you're coming in from Nagaland? Um, you're not quite audible here. Just check your connectivity.
I think she lost contact.
Shall we go to our next speaker? And if Iranggumle's connectivity improves, she can, continue after that. Is that okay, Srilata ma'am? Any in tandem board members here? Can we just move on to the next speaker?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay. Please introduce the next speaker.
Yes, ma'am. Next, we have Dr. Somrwita Ghosh, Assistant Professor of English at PNR Vignana Jyothi Institute of Engineering and Technology, Hyderabad. Her paper is titled Panoptic Gaze and Heterotopic Space in Lokenath Bhattacharya's Babughater Kumari Maachh, The Virgin Fish of Babughat. Now, I invite Dr. Ghosh to present her paper.
Uh, Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Ibrahima. Uh, so, my paper is titled Panoptic Gaze and Heterotopic Space in Lokenath Bhattacharya's Babughater Kumari Maachh or the Virgin Fish of Babughat. Paper. I'm still actually working on this. So, Babughater Kumari Maachh. This novel was originally published in Bangla in 1972 and translated into English as The Virgin Fish of Babughat in the year 1975 by Meenakshi Mukherjee. Now, due to marketing lacuna, this novel actually was unnoticed, but later it was again republished in the year 2004. So, this paper examines how Loknath Bhattacharya, in his novel Babughater Kumari Maachh, explores the theme of surveillance and control in an unusual detention camp. The novel is written in the form of diary entries that recount the horrifying experiences of the protagonist who is imprisoned in the detention camp. The detainee describes the picturesque setting of the camp with lush greenery and lakes. Nevertheless, there are no birds nearby. Although provided with material comforts, both male and female prisoners are systematically dehumanized. They're made to give in to their primal animal cravings and are deprived of any human dignity. The inmates do not possess any agency. The nude inmates are disciplined and punished by overly dressed prison guards. The protagonist of the novel receives a daily punishment of filling a stack of blank pages with words. The novel demonstrates the profound psychological effects of the gruesome circumstances on people who progressively lose their identities. This paper will primarily concentrate on the dehumanization and construction of horror in the prison camp, drawing on the Foucauldian concept of panopticism and heterotopia. So, in our modern day digital culture, the term surveillance has become more widely used. Surveillance technology is used by government bodies as well as by other private organizations to monitor our daily activities. The use of this technology has instrumental in maintaining security and preventing crimes, but it can be coercive too. Although the use of technology is a modern phenomenon, surveillance society has always existed since the beginning of human civilization. People wielded power closely monitored the lives of the common masses. An authoritarian power structure has been maintained through the use of surveillance. To discipline the subjects as well as to prevent rising, authorities have always resorted to strict measures and punishment. Authorities have recognized certain restricted places where divine and unlawful subjects are kept and segregated from the society. These places are also considered dangerous and objectors also get detained by those in power. These subjects have either dared to challenge the oppressive authoritarian regime or assumed to be potential threat. Sometimes a particular group or community is also targeted by those in power with a vested interest. Such individuals are confined in specific places which are unlike the conventional prisons. Lokenath Bhattacharya's novel is a critique of such a space of confinement controlled by coercive authoritarian force. The powers that be seeks to subjugate and dehumanize ordinary citizens and convert them into a breed of disciplined beings devoid of human qualities. Drawing on the Foucauldian concept of heterotopic space, I'll focus on the unusual setup of the interior and exterior of the jail to discuss how the authorities take various oppressive measures to control the captured humans. I draw on the concept of panoptic gaze. By reading these two concepts, I'll analyze how authoritarian power structure thrives on the servitude of the ordinary citizens. Michel Foucault, in his essay of Other Spaces, Utopias and Heterotopias, 1980s, published in 1984, starts the discussion by stating that there has been changes in our concept of space, especially in relation to the relationships between people, objects, and environment. So basically, it's a new perspective on of space in the modern era, and this of Other Spaces, Utopias, and Heterotopias, it was actually part of our lecture which he delivered to the students of architecture. Here he introduces the term heterotopia as a new spatial type. Unlike utopias, which he defines as an unreal and perfect space, heterotopic spaces are real places that are written into the institution of the society itself. They reveal paradoxes, that is, they can either be either or both spaces of freedom and or of control. These spaces exist as counter sites, simultaneously representing, contesting, and inverting all other conventional sites. It describes heterotopic space as a place that is not freely accessible to all. In the Virgin Fish of Babughat, the narrator describes how the camp where he and others are imprisoned is a closed territory located far from human habitation. The narrator Operash mentions how he and others are blindfolded and forcibly brought to this place. However, unlike the conventional prison, the camp apparently looked peaceful amidst the serene landscape. The prisoners were also allotted individual rooms provided with all luxurious facility. The narrator describes with amazement how these rooms are neat, sparkling, and clean. One of Foucault's propositions is that heterotopic space expose real places. Here, Foucault argues that despite their apparent reality, every site enacts transient rather than static ideals of public life. He cites the examples of the brothel, which exposes the interiors of fantasy lives, and 17th century European colonies in America, which expose the messy and disorganized nature of perfect other places. Similarly, through the narrator's meticulous depiction, the precariousness of this arrangement is exposed. All this perfect arrangement, the where they were living. Although both men and women were not subjected to physical violence, the sentries in the camp forced them to strip. They are provided with all material comforts like comfortable bed, expensive perfumes, a bathroom with modern provisions, and even a pair of sandals. But the inmates are not given any clothes to wear. There was also no arrangement for locking the rooms from inside. The large mirrors in the rooms and the paintings of overly dressed men and women hanged on the walls constantly reminded the inmates of their nakedness and induced a sense of guilt in them. The prisoners are made to realize how they are being progressively dehumanized. To understand how surveillance works, works in the camp, I drawn the Foucauldian concept of panopticism. In the panoptic structure, there are cells surrounding the central tower from where the guard kept a watch on the prisoners. However, the prisoners are unable to see the guards. The prisoners are also unable to see the other prisoners also. It creates in the subjects this panoptic gaze. It creates in the subjects a paranoid sense of conscious and continuous visibility, launching their internalization of the oppressive gaze and eliciting an automatic, almost instinctual self control regime that is observably expressed in physical action. Through the narrator's everyday experiences, we see how the inmates in the camp assume that they are constantly under surveillance and thus adjust their behavior accordingly. Consequently, they restrict regulation of the body. From the fear of being beaten up by the armed sentries, they give up the urge to wrap a towel or bedsheet around their bodies. Sooner, they get accustomed to this behavior, losing the desire to wear clothes. I'll quote from the novel. The narrator mentions, they do not openly order us to do anything. They only prepare the atmosphere and let us loose there. And we automatically become victims of their intentions. We ourselves got accustomed to the routine. There is a horrifying description of birds being shot by the sentries in the prisons of the inmates to invoke a sense of fear and to evade thoughts of escape from the prison. The narrator shares numerous instances where the inmates are constantly dehumanized and robbed of all human dignity and pride. The narrator mentions how there is a deliberate discrepancy between the ways of serving lunch and dinner, this alteration between primitive and refined ways of living. So, like lunch is usually like thrown at them, and like animals, they have to like pick those bits of food and eat. And but again at night, there's a complete change in how food is served. So they are served in a very civilized manner. There's in a table, in a plate. Uh, However, in the unusual prison of Lokenath Bhattacharya's fictional world, there are some specific characteristics. Unlike the panopticon structure of Jeremy Bentham, the prisoners can interact with each other. So even like they can participate in any kind of sports, or they can actually move together. Because the intention here is like what the sentries or the authoritarian powers what they want is that they live a very perfectly healthy life physically. They should not suffer from any kind of physical discomfort, but they're constantly becoming mentally and moral debasement is happening. uh, Here, the narrator exposes the devious plans of the authoritarian power. He describes how male and female prisoners are forced for compulsory copulation. The narrator remarks, everywhere, attempts are constantly being made to change Homo sapiens into beast. He also assumes that the forcibly begotten children would be made to believe. So the children born to these people would be made to believe in a preconceived ideology and would join the army of the authoritarian force. So basically, the children, they are devoid of all human qualities, and the kind of, even the mothers don't take care of the babies, and even the fathers don't know who their kids are. So once they're born, they're separated from the biological mother, so they don't really develop a bond between the mother and the child. And so and these children, the narrator mentions how they disturbs the other inmates, and they're very cruel in nature. They don't have the qualities which a child actually should have. uh, Being subjected to the manipulation, the inmates undergo physical, mental, and moral debasement. They tend to lose their past memories. In fact, the chapters in the novel are, it's not really, it's not arranged in a proper manner. It's not so it's like sometimes there will be dates. So like 25th November, again, there should be there will be December, and again, there are alphabets like L16, like then LR18. So there is no proper sequence in how this is written. So this is a deliberate attempt on the part of the author to kind of tell how these people, actually these inmates, and even the protagonist who is imprisoned in the who is imprisoned, is actually losing his memories. And he's not aware of what year he bought here, and what is the exact date. So he tend to he they all, and even it's not just his own experience, but even the other inmates also, they're losing their memories living here. The past memories, about their childhood, about their youth. The novel is a critique of the oppressive state apparatuses that try to ensure that discipline reigns over society. Although the detainees have not committed any major crime, they're held on suspicion that prisons might pose a challenge to state policies and administration. The narrator here is imprisoned because his writings were not acceptable to those in power, and as a punishment, now he has to fill up the pages, and he can't really write anything against the authority. And on all these papers, after filling up all the papers, the sentries take those papers and they check whether he's writing something against. So he just has to fill the pages, and he just fills them with random sentences, words, and he's unable to actually so he's also in this process, he's also losing his creativity. um, One of the fellow there are also other prisoners who might not be writers, or who had written nothing against the authoritarian regime. Even they are also imprisoned, men and women. So one of the fellow prisoners of the narrator remarks that, I'll quote, "We could neither join the establishment nor support the rebels and take part in the game of destruction. We wanted to save our skin, and perhaps it has been a just punishment." So here actually is an indirect reference to the Naxalite movement. So when this novel was being written, it was 1972. So it was so during this time, Bengal was under the grip of the Naxalite movement, and how the state apparatuses were adopting repressive measures to crush any kind of uprising. So. This novel particularly has different strands. So it could be a critique of contemporary life, about the power structure. So there are so many strands in this novel. So I have just discussed about a part of my working paper. I am still working on this, and thank you.
Thank you. I'm in touch with Iranggumle. I'll just get back to you on whether she's joining or we can just proceed. As of now, we can continue our discussions on the keynote and Ms. Somrwita, Dr. Somrwita's paper. So when Iranggumle is ready to join, I'll let you know. We can just proceed with our discussions now. Dr. Somrwita, this story that you presented, is it based on real life, any particular real life happening, or is it?
No, ma'am, it's not really based on any real experiences, but it's a kind of, many critics say that it's a kind of futuristic allegory. I mean, it is, ahead of its time. So
Mhm.
it's a critique of the power structure, basically, that ultimately, the absolute power corrupts.
Mm.
Yes, it's not based on, yes.
Because I was just wondering whether this forced copulation happened in history, um, and of course,
So,
there are so many instances to show that the prison system, the idea of punishment is
yes.
born of a very depraved imagination.
Hmm.
The kind of stripping people. I mean, whoever thought? I mean, it's a kind of common punishment. Police do that. Making a person naked is somehow everybody thinks of that as a punishment. It's a common punishment. All these come from the human imagination.
I mean,
And
It's also
just
critique of
wondering if this is also some.
yeah, it's also critique of the human life. Ultimately, like they all given to their basic primal bestial instinct. Once they're they lose initially, all they are reluctant to this men and women. They are shy and reluctant, but as time goes, and they are forced to copulate. And so this is like how there is a constant debasement is happening. So this is also a critique of you can say the consumerist culture, because in the prison they're provided with all kinds of facilities. And with sarcastically the narrator says, we are given a pair of sandals even, and that the bathroom description, there's he gives a very meticulous description where there are expensive perfumes and soaps, and everything is there but except clothes. So
So, is there any indication about why they are kept there? Is there some crime? And then, who is the authority? Any idea about that? I have two
it's
questions.
like again,
One is wait,
like
wait, wait. One that is one question. The other thing is, I was just quickly sort of looking up details about this book. Apparently, it was published 2 or 3 years before the emergency.
yes,
So, do you think there is some allusion to that
yes,
political
that is, I mean, yeah, I mean, I have
questions?
mentioned also, yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes, there is, this is a, it could be a political allegory. And when when Bengal was in the grip of the Naxalite movement, and how the state apparatus were especially, adopting such repressive measures, especially against the youth. So yeah, that there is an indirect, it's implied in a way. Yes. Um, what was the other question?
I
The
said,
first
who is there any indication of what the crime
authority.
was? Why are they put in that sort of a prison, and who the authorities who
Uh,
put them like there?
actually, like again, like they don't know that who is the authority here. So he's the main antagonist, or the main he's like invisible, but they this only the sentries, it's who follow the orders. So this person who is the supreme power, I mean, the narrator never, I mean, they don't know, the inmates who stay here, who is. And because they're blindfolded and brought here, so the crime, I mean, this narrator operation, who is whose experience we and he constantly tries to, the way the narrative, there's a different narrative style also. This, it's kind of there as if the narrator is talking to the readers. So it's kind of, he's trying to address the questions which might come to the readers minds, like why don't you there are towels, there are bed sheets, why don't you wrap them up? So he says that the sentries would come and beat up us with the batons. So so this is a kind of narrative style that Lokenath Bhattacharya employs in this here. And so who is the central authoritarian force, and that person is not someone who is existent in the novel, but it's the sentries who actually carry out the orders. And of this authority, who has set down the rules, that how it, but he is never visible. But all the inmates are knows that there's a power which controls. So they are adjusting their behavior accordingly. So in the first 2 days, when food was thrown at them, people don't accept it, but out of hunger, the second day they actually grab the food. And it's similarly like animals. So women, when their clothes are taken off from their bodies, initially they were crying, and they were shy, and they were asking for clothes. But even though like the sentries don't rape them, but they just remove their clothes forcibly their clothes are removed. So but even the women also, they even I mean they also lose all their shyness and their all reluctance, and they even like when they're, so every night women, different women will be sent to different men's rooms. So initially they were reluctant, again after when this kind of behavior becomes, because they try to like adjust themselves accordingly. So there's a continuous debasement, moral, physical, mental, and they are slowly being, as the narrator says, that from and humans were becoming beasts.
Is there any, why are they put there? What is their crime or anything? Is there any indication about that?
The writer actually has written something against the regime, so that was one of the reasons. But there are also others, who were brought here. So like is one of the inmates says that I means why were we brought here, because we did not take sides. Either we have to take side of the rebels here imply the Naxalites, and the other is the authority. So these people are, they didn't take sides, so that was the crime. So they and the authority was like kind of considered them as a threat, that they are a potential threat. So but they did not really commit major crimes.
Okay, kind of your I mean your description of the novel kind of reminded me of that song, no, Hotel California.
And also to that one, the thought, I was thinking of the Thought Police, and that's a song by Sting. I was
uh,
watching. Yeah. I found out. I felt there was some. Could there be a connection between Ajay's paper and the Maoist rebels being imprisoned? Is there something
Ma'am,
in both
can I?
Maoism?
Yes. Can I answer?
Yes, yes.
Ma'am, because I've just been waiting here since I've actually read Lokenath Bhattacharya's The Virgin Fish of Babughat. It's actually one of my most. I really liked it. It's one of my most favorite novels. The thing is, Lokenath Bhattacharya actually became famous as a writer in France before he became famous over here in India.
yes, sir.
So he was actually a part of the French intellectual traditions, artistic
Yes,
traditions, and
yes.
he was actually very active in those traditions. During the period of emergency, he observed what was happening in India. So if you look at history, the Naxalite movement, the rise of the Naxalite movement, and the emergency, they sort of overlap. So what's happening over there is he's looking at the country, what's happening, and he's coming out with his observation, because one perspective with respect to the emergency and what was happening is the entire nation became like a prison. The prison expanded to engulf the entire nation. So that's one perspective that was put forward in those days, and he has actually run with that idea and used this novel to talk about a metaphor of carcerality with respect to what he perceived was happening within India. But he takes off from that point and he starts to dwell deeply on the idea about how carcerality affects or influences the human mind and how it seeks to alter the human mind. Because when they reform, of course, it has a good sense, but when you look at its application and the barbarity with which some things are applied within prison, it actually does the opposite. It changes one into a regressive state. So Bhattacharya actually revolves around this. In my thesis, I've actually spoken about Loknath Bhattacharya's writing, but it doesn't, as ma'am was talking about, it cannot be considered a specific text that comes under the definition of what one might infer as prison writing, because the experience is external, but he has used the prison in a metaphorical sense to talk about wider structures, wider systems that actually have a hint of the carceral apparatus within them, which again ties into Foucault's idea about how prisons, barracks, hospitals, schools, they're all one and the same thing, but they just operate in different levels and different dimensions. So this book was actually a very instrumental book that, with respect to prison and writing about prison in the Indian context. I've actually talked about this book in my thesis.
Question to you, Ajay Ramakrishnan. This one about your book, the book you spoke about, Ferreira's. It is a critique of surveillance itself. Okay. The book is a critique of surveillance. I
No,
mean, in the yes.
no. The book is not a. It's not a critique of surveillance. Rather, towards the end, after he's released, it's been 4 years since he's released, and he actually talks about two fears that he has. One is not being able to get back the time he lost there, and two, Big Brother is. He literally says this: Big Brother is always watching. So he critiques surveillance
Yes.
through the process. He's actually not trying to do it directly, but not in an overt way, but in a covert way.
Okay. Does he regret I mean, other than the time spent there, was he tortured to such an extent that he regretted every moment of that surveillance?
Uh, okay. What do you mean by torture?
I mean, as a inside the prison,
Because when we use the word torture with respect to the prison,
physical.
it operates at different levels.
Mm.
If you
Yeah,
consider
all kinds.
all kinds, so
Yeah.
let's look at the initial level. He is separated. He's plucked from his family. He's plucked from his society. When he's waiting for a train, he's plucked from everything that he has in his life, and he's thrown inside prison for 4 years. And as he's inside prison, more cases are added to his names. And he actually points out that a case was registered in his name, wherein he was caught by a bunch of policemen in a specific region, but the time that is specified, the date that is specified, during that time he was actually inside prison. What they do is they keep piling on all these cases on him, and he has to suffer the routine of being inside jail, going to judicial visits, visiting the court, running through the entire this tedious routine of prison and judiciary, and he's unable to sort of reconcile himself to the fact that he's just lost everything in his life for the next 4 years, 4 years and 8 months, and he doesn't know when after he is released, he is able to say 4 years and 8 months, but when he is inside, he doesn't have a clear idea of when he is going to be released, because cases keep adding. And what happens is, with respect to Naxalite prisoners, especially during those phases, even these days it happens. The moment you get released from prison and you step out, you're again fished by the policeman, charged in a different case and thrown into another prison. So this keeps happening, and his entire family has to suffer, because that's another level of torture. His wife's writing to him, and slowly he realizes all the friends that he thought would help him, the family that he thought would help them, they've all abandoned his family. His wife and children have to fend for themselves. Only a few people are supporting them. And since he's branded as an suddenly his entire circle doesn't want to do anything with him or his family. Everybody wants to distance himself. So he has to experience all this torture within prison. His child's growing up. His child doesn't see him. He can only know what his child's doing through the letters he receives. So he's experiencing torture at multiple layers. And when looking at the physical torture, that also happens. That also happens at multiple layers. You would have inmates doing certain things. You would have convict warders doing certain things. You would have superintendents doing certain things. Even from the example that I was hinting at earlier in my keynote, transgender inmates are housed inside a cell. The cell is right next to his cell. Suddenly, what happens is there is a huge number of male inmates coming into that space within the prison. It's actually high security to look at those transgender inmates, catcall them, whistle at them. So Ferreira doesn't have any sort of mustache or beard. They start catcalling him, thinking he's also a transgender prisoner. And he's sitting there thinking, I don't know what's going to happen if they open that gate. So he's all when talking about torture, it's not only the physical torture that he has to experience. There are multiple levels of mental torture that he goes through within prison.
Okay.
And does he regret? He says in the end, he says he doesn't regret what he has done in life, but rather he now regrets that he's been branded as a Maoist, because the moment he wants something in society, it is very easy to now brand his entire the people who stand with him as Maoists and all throw them in jail, because now they have a template within which they can fit him and anybody who is connected to him.
Ajay sir, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
I was listening to your keynote lecture. It was really nice and gave a good speculation into what I was working on. I'm working on indigenous communities in India. I'm also working on the idea of Naxalites and Moas in India.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
have a question for you. The thing is that we were talking about how there was self-surveillance going on in prison by the
Yes.
after some time where he starts self-surveying himself and
Yes.
also the environment around him and the people in it. So eventually, it also becomes like in the idea of the memory lens, it also keeps in the idea of keep on recollecting and remembering so that he doesn't go through the trauma into forgetting himself or the environment, the physical environment. But my idea is about the thin line that runs around the therapeutic idea of writing as well as the terrorizing idea of writing, because the line is very thin, and it also sometimes gets blurred by the way you were talking about, the tortures that he has gone through and how his prison construct doesn't leave him even after he's out of prison, and how the taboo of being a moist also is putting him under a lot of pressure to keep meticulously working and surviving him wherever he is, despite the situation,
Yes.
physical environment of a prison or in a society. So I'd like you to deliberately throw some light on the idea of that self-surveillance of that past memories and how it becomes the idea of trauma, because the trauma is enforced both temporally as well as physically. But how the line of this therapeutic or is the terror that runs through?
Okay. Okay. I'll start by explaining self-surveillance as I used it. So he's not been inside prison previously. So you're thrown inside there. You're suddenly in a very high intensity situation. You're unbelievably anxious. You don't know. You only know that everybody around you is a criminal. Everybody around you has done something. You don't know what they've done, the level of violence they are capable of, and this starts playing into your mind, into your psyche. And if you look at Ferreira, he's actually thrown into a separate cell. Since he's classified as an Naxalite prisoner, they will not let him mingle with the general population. He's thrown inside. If you read the book, it's called the anda, the egg, wherein cells are separate and no light actually filters into the cell. It's nearly dark in there, and you can't see anybody else. You can't see the other inmates. You can only hear their voices, and he has to sit inside the cell and try to make sense of what's happened. You need to remember that he was picked up from a police station. He was in between traveling from one place to another when he was picked up. So so what happened to him came like a bolt out of the blue. The first thing that happens once you're thrown inside is you need to come to terms with the reality that you are now inside a prison. You are not getting out anytime soon because the authority has planned its move and thrown you in there. So what happens is most inmates, they go through this phase where they need to reconcile with their reality. And what happens next is they will start looking at themselves. What have they done? What has society done to them? How did they end up there? And then from their social situation, they'll start looking at their physical body and their mental state. And Ferreira does, not only Ferreira, any inmate goes through this phase wherein you are trying to reconstitute the self because you believed you were a citizen, you believed you had rights, you believed you had freedom. It's all gone in an instant. Everything that you believed has gone in an instant, and now you're inside a place where everything that you took for granted is denied to you. Your freedom is denied to you. Your rights are denied to you. You are under the control of somebody else. And the moment you realize that, it's a shock, and your body starts reacting to that. Ferreira himself points this out. He asks for clothes, the clothes don't fit. His own clothes don't fit because he started shrinking. And the way his mind works, because you're sitting in a cell, nobody's there, you can't talk to anybody, you're just sitting there by yourself. You're thinking about yourself, you're thinking about what's happening, your mind keeps running. And that also starts having an effect. So you start thinking about yourself, you start surveilling what's happening to you, and through the process of looking at yourself, you start looking at what others are experiencing, what others are doing, and then you start connecting with people who seem to have a similar level of understanding as you have. With respect to Ferreira, he starts connecting with other Naxalite inmates or high security inmates that are there inside the Anda. Slowly, he starts, through them, he is able to start looking at the prison. So it's a slow process that needs to start from the self and then work its way out. It is highly traumatic because he has to face his own demons. There's actually a line that says, the inmate has to face his own demons every day, every night before he goes to sleep, and there's no way out, there is nowhere to run. Unless and until he faces the trauma, he will not be able to move forward. And each inmate does it at, and what happens is he will then slowly start reconstituting his own subjecthood, and in that process he starts looking at the prison, and slowly he is able to see that the prison is not this overbearing, dominating leviathan of a beast. Rather, there are ruptures in its workings, there are problems in the way things happen, and slowly he is able to sort of find ways of doing things for himself, use the system, and then critique the system, and slowly present it on display for others to see. This idea comes to him in a step-by-step process, but to initiate it, he has to start self-surveilling. And when I say he, I'm not only talking about Ferreira, but you read any prison novel or any prison narrative, the inmate starts off by looking at the self and only then moving externally. I hope I answered that question.
Ajay, I have one question, Ajay. Um, I mean,
Ma'am,
both
I think
Somrita and
she's on
Ajay.
mute. Yeah,
Can you hear me, Ajay?
yeah, I can hear, but I think the person who asked the question, I think she's on mute. I can't hear.
Yeah,
Oh, Ranjini, you're on mute.
yeah. Uh, yeah, he did answer my question, but I also just want to clarify this part. Was the self-surviving, the self-surveillance was also a kind of survival point for him to come out what he was going through because he was alone. Eventually, we are humans, we are interdependent. So, is that a point that became a survival point and also prosthetic memory that he could tell this world through his struggle? Is that kind of a narrative?
It's not the narrative. It's a method that any inmate uses. If one were
Okay.
to go into cognitive science, they actually have a term for this. It's called cognitive niche creation. Even memory studies uses ideas from
Yeah,
cognitive sciences.
cognitive.
It's called cognitive niche creation, wherein you need need to create a niche in order to adapt. But to create the niche, the organism has to observe itself. It needs to understand its own limits and what's happening to it with respect to the environment within which it has been placed. And in this instance, the organism is the inmate. The environment is the carceral space.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great, insightful answer that I got today with your lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Ajay, this the
you.
carceral space, no,
Yes, ma'am.
or prison as an institution.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm coming to it from another angle. We were till now we were sympathizing with the prisoner and all that he has to go through, but when you look at uh, punishment as being given to antisocial elements, and they are incarcerated to keep society safe.
Mm.
Do you have any narrative about the carceral space as a penitentiary, as a reformative space, where people have reformed due to the prison experience?
Yes, ma'am. All of there is some level of reformation going on. For example, I'll give you one. The Bad Boys of Bokarao Jail by Chetan Mahajan. So the guy is thrown into prison. It's actually one of my primary texts in my research. So the guy is into prison. He actually has unsavory instances and experiences inside prison, but he is able to see that there are inmates who are sensible, who actually landed in prison from a moment of violence or rage. They aren't hardened criminals. They're just there because of a mistake that they made. Sometimes it might be something as simple as riding a train without a ticket, or stealing some food from somebody because they were hungry. And what that does is, this guy is from an upper middle class background, and slowly he sees that some of them are okay, and that changes the way he looks at it. The space might not be might not be light or dark, but it's rather gray, and he's able to see that some inmates are actually good. One example that he gives is, there is an inmate with a physical disability. He's completely paralyzed from his neck down and unable to move. What happens is, there are other inmates who are actually accused of murder outside. They're serving long sentences, and what they do is, the moment this man needs something, they actually lift him up, take him wherever he wants, get him fed, and give him things that he needs. They actually take care of this man who is unable to do it for himself, which is something that people don't do normally when considering a criminal. And he sees that, okay, there is kindness in prison, but it operates at a certain level and it operates at a different level, and this changes him so much so that after his release, Chetan Mahajan actually goes back to prison and visits those inmates whom he considers are actually a good influence inside prison. Ma'am,
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I answer your question. Hello.
Yes. Thank you, Ajay. Listener.
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
understood what you were trying to say. Thank you. And I'm glad I could share one more title with the students.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I have another
That's
question
it.
for the last
Second.
speaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Continue.
um, yes, shall I continue?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Ma'am, she was talking about the prison for the women and how they were stripped out of their clothes and were sent to people for any kind of pleasure. I would like to ask her some question, some introspective aspect that uh, even the book called The Mothers of Manipur by Teresa Ramon, a journalist, speaks about how the women in Manipur are often subjected to rape in the name of Maoist informants. As Ajay Ramakrishnan was also well on the topic about being falsely subjected to labels and taboos. So this book also will talk about how women are subjected to rape, and if they come across any harassment by the armed rifles also, they're put subjected to rape, and they'll be stripped naked, and for which there is a resistant walk, that naked walk that would have happened. And how come this institution of jail or a prison allows the same, that is enforced inside a prison, almost stripping everybody off? Isn't it against it? Like, nobody is finding it any kind of resistance against whatever is happening in that particular prison. I just want to know about it. uh, because we are seeing a lot of reflections in and around every kind of speciality, be it prison or a society. Everything has a parallel reflections to any spatial acquaintance that we all share. So I was a little taken aback, and I haven't read the book, so I just want to know about it too, uh,
So,
from
yeah. So there was this initial reluctance, when they were first brought to the prison, where women were crying, and they were, while they were being stripped naked and all. But the sentries and all, they don't really rape this woman. But what they have a more diabolical plan, as that they send these women to the rooms of the men. So we kind of see that the narrator mentions that these women initially they're reluctant, but gradually they give in to that their cravings, they for the sexual gratification. But yes, there as resistance, you can say, this children. There's a very strange kind of, when this children, when we're born to these women, they're separated from them after the birth, and they never really form a bond. There's a mother's or a child, that bond is never it's never bonded together. So what happens is that towards the end we see that one of the inmates, a woman whom the this protagonist was in love with, and so she kind of slits the throat of the child, because and that was an act of resistance against this regime, because these children will ultimately, they will join the force of the, and they will become very they're inhuman creatures. And so this was because these children, they were this was a forced copulation. It was not really so. And these children who are born out of this process, so they don't really, as I said, they don't really bond with their parents. So they are separated outside right after their birth. So this mother slitting the throat of a child, and this itself, is an act of, it's not like it's this is very unlike, that a mother, who is where his mother maternal instinct, she's going beyond that, and she's slitting the throat of the child, because she doesn't want the child, to be brought up with all those bestial qualities. And so she doesn't want the next generation to also become, this kind of reproduction should happen, and people should actually be, I mean, there should be more births. Actually, she's kind of, this is a kind of a resistance there.
Ma'am, you were talking about female gratification, but I really want to know, in a prison of already in a very destabilized mental situation. I little bit wonder if that's what is the thought put across by the prison. Possibly the stripping of the clothes, it is enforced definitely, and the same happens for the mothers of Manipur, where they voluntarily strip it off. But it doesn't mean that the people who voluntarily strip it off has not gone through the trauma of rape at all. Initially, they have to do that. They have to do that to prove or to make a point that the resistance happens is just not, or the rape is not just about the stripping. Even if it is voluntary, it is still disturbing for the 12 women who have done it. So I am a
This is
little exfoliating on what you exactly said about the idea of sexual gratification inside a very traumatic space. Possibly, I still would like to give a benefit of doubt by throwing uh, and fellow feeling, or possibly they were enforced into this kind of population. Because I don't think stripping them off or sending them off to the other room would have been consensual, possibly. That is the only point that I would like to get across. But
So
thanks for the
here,
insightful contribution.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead,
So here,
please.
yeah. S- so what happened here? It's like, as you also sir mentioned also, that it is not really, a kind of a prison. It is not read as a, as a prison narrative in that sense. It is the different strands. This particular novel. So here, it's kind of says that, men, women, they're both giving into their primal cravings. So initially, even though, this women who are, the narrator keeps on saying, there is an old woman also who is supposed to be a grandma. So she is also, part of this. Her behavior also changes. Even like young women who were initially reluctant, they also kind of. So it's like, it's kind of, it can be like, a critique of, of human nature. Well, it's like, he's trying to say, it's like they're giving into their primal instinct. So if you're kept like that, you ultimately lose all your human dignity, your pride, your so this is like a world which is, constantly consumed by this consumerist culture. So it's not really, a critique of, this he's not trying to commodify here women's body, or trying to address the questions you ask, like, so he doesn't really questions, or his intention is not to look at those, because this is not conventional prison. This is an unusual kind of a setup, exceptional in this world.
Yeah, I quite agree with Somrwita, madam. Because she was saying that it's not exactly about prison but carceral system. For instance, a school, a college, family, all these can be where there is a lot of surveillance and people are parents or teachers, whatever, very strict and suppressing, repressing. That could also be a caste system. So any abuse, there are so many abusive systems, right? Abusive atmospheres, uh, which which carry with them the things that go with the prison system. So I think we actually had a very nice discussion, and the students were silent, but I'm sure a lot has gone into their minds. They've taken down notes. I want to thank our board members who are here, Aparna, Dr. Rufus, Dr. Srilata. And can we just wind up today's session in tandem team? Thank you, Ajay. Thank you,
Okay.
Samrita, madam.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Um,
Who's giving the vote of thanks?
No, no. Myself, ma'am. I'm doing the vote of thanks.
Yeah.
We have come to the end of the session. Now I deem it an honor to propose the vote of thanks. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our keynote speaker, Dr. Ajay Ramakrishnan Venkitachalam sir, for sharing his insightful perspectives on prison narratives and surveillance. I also thank our paper presenters for today's session, Ms. Iranggumle Hemang and Dr. Somrwita Ghosh ma'am. A special thanks to our college principal for her constant support, and our sincere thanks to Dr. Maria Preeti Srinivasan ma'am, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English, for providing various research opportunities to the scholars. And I thank all the faculty members and research scholars who are present here today. Thank you all. We'll meet again on 27th of September 2024 with the topic Transnational Flows in Independence and Civil Rights Movements. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.